Metcalfe here from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Look, we got really good feedback from the last video I did, and it became really clear that there's a hunger, especially during this COVID period, to hear information from markets. So while we can't travel, how do we get information back to you? And I thought, well, maybe I could do this on a more regular basis. And so I'm looking to offer my 2 cents about what's happening in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay every quarter. And hopefully I can bring you some news about things that are happening here in general on the ground, macroeconomic indicators, what's happening for the NZTE team here, what's happening for New Zealand companies here, what opportunities there are, and potentially even common themes that we're starting to look at in the office. So it's going to be really hard to give you a good overview of all of the 4 markets that we work in, but what I can do is start off with Brazil, and I think it's illustrative of what's happening elsewhere in Argentina and Uruguay. We're starting to see numbers go up a little bit, maybe in Argentina a little less so, but they've been going through a really difficult patch in the last wee while. Here in Brazil, where numbers are starting to go up, we're sitting at about 700 to 800 new deaths a day, unfortunately, and shopping hours have been reduced over since last week, and that means that obviously in the run up to Christmas, things are getting a little bit more difficult for people here on the ground. Schools haven't been back yet in any meaningful way, and with regards to me and the team, we haven't seen each other since March the 18th, so it's been really complicated for a lot of people. We do see though that in Brazil things are starting to look up in terms of the economies. Back in June, I was talking about a 6% to a 9% drop in GDP forecast for this year between the Brazilian government, which was looking at about 6.5%, and the IMF and World Bank were looking closer to 8-9%. Actually, it's looking pretty good right at now compared to what it was. The Brazilian government has put out new forecast of 4.5% in the last 3 weeks, and the IMF and World Bank are actually reducing theirs to between 5 and 6% expected drop. We've seen a real bounce back in terms of retail. So retail is even at higher levels than what it was back in January, which is a real surprise. And most of that comes from online shopping. We've seen 7.3 million new internet buyers and new internet consumers come online since the start of the pandemic. So, you know, some real growth there. We saw at the start of the pandemic, actually supermarkets had increased their sales by over 4%. So some interesting figures there. In terms of manufacturing, it's actually got back to about par where it started the year. Obviously the laggard we've got here is services, so anything in the hotel industry, the bars, the restaurants, etc. are really suffering. We've seen a lot of unemployment happen there, and we're sitting about 14.4% in terms of unemployment. Now, what we have seen though in the last month is we've seen a real increase in foreign investment into the country. So what really dropped off to about a 10% decrease during most of this year has actually now started to increase. We've just seen in the month of November 30 billion reais invested in Brazil from outside Brazil. That's equivalent of approximately $6 billion US. Now, we look at that as really positive. So what about what's happening with NZTE, me and my team? So from the start of the pandemic, it was a real rush. I mean, everybody was trying to get their product into market. As soon as the logistics and supply chain started to break down, we were trying to get product into market, and we had some good successes there to keep those exports going. On top of that, we were trying to get money back to New Zealand, so any payments or keep any potential negotiated deals on track to pull through. So there was a lot of work around that. Now, what's happened since then is we saw a drop off towards June, July, as it seems most New Zealand companies were looking inward, and so there was a little wait there, but all of a sudden we got a real burst. So NZTE has really started to look to open up the number of customers that we're dealing with. And what that meant is there was a real intensification of onboarding of new customers that were looking to understand more markets, diversify. And what we think we've seen over the last 3 months was a real hunger for New Zealand companies to take a look at what Brazil had to offer and other Latin American countries at the same time. In terms of the sectors that are doing quite well here in Brazil, well, for me, it's absolutely agribusiness. Ever since April, when they went past 10 billion US dollars in exports for the month for the first time ever, it's been going really, really well. Now, there's certain reasons behind that. The trade tensions with US and Asia, China especially, and Australia and China as well, have really grown the exports of soy, of meat, whether it be beef, whether it be pork, whether it be chicken, for example. These are all growing. Mining is an interesting one. It's obviously been quite stable during this. The commodity prices have maintained it, and what we're starting to see now is a lot of investment from overseas companies into Brazilian mines. Anything that's in the digital sector and the tech sector is really, really interesting right now. And this is in communications, it's in education, it's in medicine, for example. If you have anything to do in that area, then it's really, really interesting. So what are some of the things that we're actually thinking about in the office and talking about in the office at the moment? So I guess the big thing that's sticking out for us at the moment is business models. Brazil and Argentina, and Uruguay to a certain extent, are all markets that are not cheap to get into. If you're manufacturing a big capital asset that has got a big price tag, I just wonder, is it possible to get part of it manufactured here in Brazil or in Argentina? Is there an opportunity to work with partners here in markets so that you can bypass some of those duties to actually have a landed cost that puts you in the right price point for your addressable market? So another really interesting thing for me that was brought up by some Argentinians that I was talking to prior to lockdown was I was like, hey, you know, New Zealand companies have great solutions. The issue is that it's got a really high price tag and it's really hard to get financing. So big international US companies or European companies actually offer financing, but you know, we have to go with them if New Zealand companies can't offer financing. Is it possible to go to a leasing deal? Is it possible for New Zealand companies to move into a leasing deal with companies with a good track record or farmers with a good track record in Latin America to get their product in market? So there's some thinking, there's some of the stuff that we're thinking around at the moment. What can we do there? Is it possible for New Zealand companies to change their business model a little bit to give them more addressable market? I don't know. It's well worth looking at. So if you're thinking about something similar to that, we'd love to hear from you. Hey, so that's my 2 cents for now, for this period. I know we're coming up to the Christmas period, to the holiday period. So to everybody there in New Zealand or wherever you are around the world, all the best. It's been a really, really hard year. I know how hard it's been for a lot of you. So all my best wishes. I hope that you get to recharge your batteries, and we'll see you on the other side. Please feel free to give us feedback. You know, I've given something really general here now, but if there's specific things you want to talk about, I want to hear from you, and I hope I can give you those answers in the first quarter version of my 2 cents. Take care. Ka kite anō.